I caught you unaware. Good morning, Julia. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing phenomenal, except I heard that it's supposed to storm in the morning.
Oh no, that's what you need is another storm.
Yeah, all we need is one more storm. So
Yes.
for those of you who are joining us this morning who actually got the message that we're actually an hour early today. And I've already been in the garden weeding a whole row.
Yes.
So,
Not surprised.
okay. So I just got a message where our guest for this morning is our congressman is running late. So we have about 10 minutes before Congressman Brecheen is going to join us. So Julie and I thought that what we would do is talk a little bit about how we know Congressman Brecheen. Julie, how do we know Congressman Brecheen?
We worked with him. We saw him pretty much every single day of this 2014 session after having worked with him in previous years, but almost every day of the 2014 session while we were working on our Common Core repeal bill.
Yep.
So we know him well and appreciate him so much for all his hard work.
Yep.
And it's such a pleasure. I haven't seen him in a few years, but such a pleasure to get to visit with him this morning. But we have a rich history with our congressman,
So,
state senator, and
yes.
The place we often started our day. So
yes. So this is former state senator Josh Brecheen, now Congressman Josh Brecheen, and Julia and I.
Yes.
Me with my head cut off. Thanks, Jules.
It's not cut off.
It's not.
It's just Croomy and Linda Murphy. Sorry, Linda, and Pastor Ledbetter.
That's right. Pastor Ledbetter was over here. Yeah.
So
here's a picture
on my computer, but
here's a picture that I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, I think ROPE was the first group to actually consolidate around an issue and bring people in, and then spearhead that issue and make change. And I would have to agree that really was the case. I mean, before the green shirts, before us getting people to because the green shirts were just one of the
We,
of the
we,
many.
we invented the t-shirts at the Capitol, and
Yes.
thank you so much to the late
Yeah.
Mark Costello for the gift. He just created them and gave them to us.
Yeah.
We're so thankful to him for that.
Yeah.
Another one of our very dear friends that helped in that cause. And
Yeah.
that was, we lined, they wouldn't hear our bill in committee. And we wore those shirts and we lined the hallways from the committee chair's office all the way to the committee room.
Yeah.
And they heard our bill.
Yes, they did finally hear it, and thanks to Josh, and you included this one, which I liked because it was what we taught. I mean, the problems with Common Core were the standards itself, but the state longitudinal database, teacher
Which was
accountability measures, which were grading teachers essentially, which doesn't sound like a bad idea until you think about the fact that that was the job of principals. And
right,
once you could force teachers to teach what you wanted them to teach, then there wasn't any autonomy in teaching and there wasn't any autonomy in curriculum. So
right,
people never really put those things together to two and two to get four, but that's why we fought that so hard. And unfortunately, we still had those measures in place. And this was all the way back to 2008, 2009, when these were implemented with Obama. So this is not, oh, I see. So I think we have Ben. Are we waiting, Ben, for Josh or?
he can't.
Thank you.
Okay. So it looks like Josh is going to be with us here in just a second. So, and I think there he is. There's our friend, the Congressman.
You
How
got
are you
you.
today?
I'm good. Good to see you both.
It's very good to see you. We were just talking about the fact that we miss you quite a bit because we haven't seen you in a while. Are you having an earthquake there?
I'm moving things around. Sorry about that.
It is so good to see
Yeah,
you.
y'all too.
Thanks for
So,
keeping on.
yes. So we kind of wanted to talk a little bit with you about the fact, because we've been talking for a few minutes about how we know you
Yes,
and how we met you as a senator, an Oklahoma State senator, and you were the author of our Common Core repeal bill on the Senate
Right.
side.
That's right. That's
And
almost 10 years ago, ladies.
I know, isn't that wild?
and
Yeah.
and I wanted to mention, your argument on the floor, on the Senate floor, was so powerful, and we had done the groundwork, letting Oklahoma know what Common Core was because they didn't know what it was, and even the author that put Common Core into law voted for the repeal. And even Governor Fallon signed it into law. And that was political pressure that
Yeah.
caused that to happen. And your excellent argument on the floor. That was one of
Well,
my favorite days.
Well, thank you, Julie. I don't know how excellent it was, but I do know that there were a lot of moms and dads that got engaged because of you guys and leadership that you brought forth to make sure parents knew what was going to happen if we embraced it. And I think the facts bear it out, right? Jenny, what are the facts now? I mean, I've been reading anecdotally across, the last 4 and 5 years of standards that were aligned and standards that weren't. And the articles I've read says that there's no great gains that they all promised if you adopted those standards.
Right.
Yeah, we have a hashtag, rope is right.
Well, good. Well, it wasn't just, look, it was, we all know that the educational attainment they promised has not proven true. And yet the immorality that they promised would have come forth. And that's what, as you all know, my last floor debate talked about, reading the bluest eye on the floor, which was written by Toni Morrison to give you an insight into a rape incident from the eyes of the rapist. And to think that that is a text exemplar should be allowable. And just incredible.
Yeah.
So this is you. Here you are.
I just told you about the bluest eye.
Hmm.
Let me read you a little bit about the bluest eye. On page 162 to 163, it's going to be read to meet the ELA for 10th through 12th graders right now. If we come August, September, and October, this is what your students are going to be reading. A bold desire ran down his GENITALS, softening the lips of his ANUS.
Wow.
He wanted her F-bomb tenderly, but the tenderness wouldn't hold. The tightness of her D, and I'll leave it to your imagination, was more than he could bear. His soul seemed to slip down his guts and
My friend Dan Newberry's looking at me because he knows what I stand for and he's going, Josh, what are you doing?
Removing himself, he grabbed his genitals. That's the bluest eye. I'm waiting for
I
somebody
couldn't.
to get
Yeah,
out
that
there.
was disgusting.
You know, I'm giggling and I shouldn't be, because you are a very Christian man. I mean, of all of the people I know, you talk about your Christianity, but you walk your talk. And I remember that day, and it was absolutely, you were so embarrassed and sickened to do that. But we had gotten to the point where people were not listening to you, they weren't listening to us. And somebody had to make that statement. And I'm just wondering, Josh, do you think we've gotten better from where you were? I mean,
Well,
do you
yeah. Look, I think what that was, almost 10 years ago is something that sadly, just from hearing what, Senator Standridge has been telling me, he's been having to fight others in the state legislature of the books that are being placed all across our nation's libraries. Um, you know, 10 years ago, it was kind of an anomaly that you would have give children access to that type of brainwashing garbage that would open them up into a hypersexualized culture. And today, moms and dads have a right to be concerned that
Yes.
here you raise your children in standards and morality, and you send them to school, and you have an expectation that stuff like that is not going to be pervasive. And parents are right to get engaged now to a greater level than they have. And you know what, as much as anything, I guess this is going to provoke moms and dads. I think it's pretty easy, in the 80s and 90s to just say, I'll send them to school, they'll be okay, I don't have to be vigilant. Well, that's not the case anymore.
Right.
Well, we had one of the graphics that before you got on that we were looking at, and this is my ugly graphic of the 4 pillars of the Obama education takeover. And let's not forget, we have to lay this at the feet of Obama. This is the one who began all of this. Well, that's not true. I mean, it goes way, way back, but this particular, the 4 pillars and that particular thing fell at the feet of Obama. How have you, I know that Congress previously has been concerned about what the state, in terms of any level of the state, is collecting data on kids. Do you know kind of where we are on that at the federal level? Because this was, the state longitudinal database was the state collecting the information that sent it on then to the federal government. That's what that was all about.
Yeah, Jenny, I don't know the latest on that. I'd be happy to get my staff to start looking at what's taking place. It'd be a violation of the Fourth Amendment. But it's astounding if you think in 1979, what was the Federal Department of Education? Up to 1979, it was just a statistical source. It was designed so that we could actually meet what Federalist 45 said and have the power of the state be numerous and indefinite, the power of the Fed to be few and finite. And where people specific to education as much as anything, you can look across state lines and look at state educational policy and go, man, that's really working in Massachusetts, English language arts. We're going to employ that. That's not working in name a state. We're not going to do that. But what happened in 79, the Federal Department of Education was created. We had this one size fits all. And so it's stealing ingenuity, and it's a carrot and stick that says, we want you to embrace our values if you want our money. And it's compounded the problems that we're talking about of exposing kids to amoral content, exposing kids to things that's not about educational attainment. It's all about indoctrination, sadly, many times.
Well,
So-
and that does damage to their mental health. Kids do not have any business seeing that kind of stuff. And there's a billion-dollar industry that has popped up to specifically get these kinds of books into our public schools.
Yeah.
It all comes through federal dollars attached. And why these people are in what they call it education still, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Why people are in our schools that want those books, I cannot imagine. I mean, I know why,
Yeah.
but they should be there.
Well, look, what I want to see us change from Washington, D.C. is the ability to threaten you through, take on these values or lose your funds. The simplest
Right.
solution for that is let's do what Ronald Reagan was saying. Let's get the federal government out of education. Reagan was calling for the end of the federal Department of Education in 1981. What he was calling for is let's return it to what it was just a few years ago. Let's empower the states to have the information. We can be a data resource, but in terms of saying this is what you're going to do in your state, and we're going to take money from the local level, send it to the Fed, the same Fed that's got 100 different federal education programs, even outside the U.S. Department of Education. Just think about that for a moment.
Right.
And all the thousands of people that are sitting in cubicles under the umbrella of the Federal Department of Education. And by the time that you send your taxpayer monies to Washington, D.C., and it's returned with strings attached, how much further could those dollars have gone to actually hire a teacher? Those taxpayer monies that could have been retained in the state of Oklahoma, hired more teachers, which we know is the most effectual way of leading a student to greater levels of knowledge with parent involvement.
Right.
So I have a question for
that's
you.
efficiency in education.
When you were a senator here, you and I we always talked about this. If you go to a legislator and you say anything about, education or education law, one of the first things they say is, well, we're for local control. Right? How is it that
I get to play that card now in Washington, D.C. because it is absolutely constitutional for me to say states need to be empowered to do this.
Right. So here's my question to you. Why is this, if they all seem to say the right things, I'm not sure they know, but they at least say the right things. How is it that we don't get the federal government out? How come we keep taking these federal dollars and keep ending up with the garbage that we have through those strings?
Well, because, you got to take words and you got to turn it into action. I joined Thomas Massey on the floor. I wasn't up here 2 months, and Thomas is moving forward a measure to in the Parents' Bill of Rights, I believe was the bill, to basically get the Federal Department of Education returned to what we discussed earlier in this conversation, to get rid of it. And so I joined Thomas Massey, and there are people up here who that blows their mind that you would talk about no Federal Department of Education intrusion in the classroom, because they don't have the knowledge to know that worked in our system of governance up until 1979. And so we live in the short-term history, and we don't know our long-term history. We don't know why was Reagan saying we need to get rid of this, and it's because Reagan foresaw what it's become.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, a cudgel to beat states with.
How many of your counselors are just high school counselors that went in my time frame, and they probably were prepared, had much more time to prepare you for college. Make sure that. How much of a counselor's time now is utilized to just make sure that they're abiding by federal regs? I mean, you hear this all the
Or
time about
Most
the number of administration staff increases that has occurred school system after school system. If you look at the graphing over the last 20 and 30 years, administrative costs, so much of that can be attributed to federal regulations.
yeah.
Oh, listen, when 25 years ago, when mine were both in elementary school, I remember something came up and another parent had said, well, the counselor doesn't have time to see my child about this topic. And I said, I asked the faculty, I said, why doesn't the counselor have time to visit with this child? And they laughed. And they said, oh, counselors are just there to get federal grants. Well, that was 25 years ago.
Yeah. So
Oh,
I want to ask you, so when you actually ran for Congress, I think I called you or I texted
You
you or
did.
something.
You said, "What are you doing?"
yes. And I was screaming in the background.
Oh, and you told me that you felt like you had a call to do this.
I
And
prayerfully knew that if I didn't, I was going to be violating my conscience before the Lord, and so I obeyed and filed 3 hours before the filing deadline. Everybody thought I think, had lost my scruples, and
no, gosh, not me.
and
I just cried.
yeah.
Well, one of the things that I said, you had a lot of dark money against you. And I think you probably know I've been doing a lot of research in dark money and elections in Oklahoma. And you had a lot of dark money run against you. And one of the things that I say in my presentation is that you had told me that this was, God's charge on your life. And I said, there's no way that if that wasn't the charge on your life by God, you would have won this election because of all of the dark money against you. So you go, boy.
Well, the Lord was faithful to, when we follow what our conviction of our heart, if we're, submitting our life before his will and say, Lord, I'll do what you want. And we feel impressed in our heart that he's speaking to our heart to go a direction and we don't do it. I don't want to be there. So I followed what my wife and I knew was that strong impression, and we saw him have our rear guard.
Right.
So I want to ask you the two-pronged question. What is the best thing about being there, and what's the worst thing about being there?
The best thing is just giving the platform to be able to advance biblical principles that I know it's going to take to restore our nation, and constitutional principles. So I'm grateful for the platform that the Lord has given me. And then the hard thing is being away from a family that I love dearly.
How is the family? How is your family?
They're good. Casey, my wife, who you all had encountered and know, she's holding up well. I'm actually surprised. I think she likes the fact that I don't mess with her schedule when I'm away. We've got a 20-month-old, and she gets to sit bedtimes, and Dad doesn't mess those up. She actually is doing, I think it's tougher on me than it is on her. She's doing well.
Well, good. So
I'm surprised. I mean, like, that could be people could hear that goes, you sure your wife is, loving you as much as she used to? No, she's an awesome woman. She's been really good. Like, God's given her grace this time. In the state legislature, it was harder on her. But there's just some grace now that we're thankful for.
Yeah, that was one of I was like, oh no, that cute baby, how can he leave?
That cute baby, man, she gets spoiled when Dad's home. So yeah, we're G'ing and hawing well.
Yeah, good.
You know what that is? That's I grew up in an Amish community. That's how you communicate to the animal driving the cart. G and haw.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a...
Jenny, can I make sure that no one who watches this, is he Amish? No, I'm not Amish. If I was Amish, I grew up in an Amish community. I know them pretty well. I'm not Amish. I just wanted to make sure.
I was just going back to your days of wrangling horses.
Yes.
I did a lot of that. I grew up in the cutting horse industry. I sure did.
You did. what is
Jenny's
what?
frozen.
Oh, am I? Uh-oh. Oh, did we lose everybody?
Well, we're back, I think. Everybody's
Okay.
back. We did
Are
have
you?
a moment there.
Well, that's a weird one. Okay. So, going forward, what do you have bills that you want to get passed? Are you just trying to change the culture there? I mean, what are you thinking? What's your plan?
The plan is that it goes back to what I said a minute ago. I have absolute confidence that if we will right size morally, right size constitutionally, that is the prescription to turn this country around. And so every chance where I get to stand up and share on those two fronts, I'm going to, when I'm impressed to do so. There is, a high number of things that we're doing that's not constitutional, and
Yeah.
trying to push back where I can. You can't turn a ship that's headed south due north as quickly as many would want, but by degree turns. That's what I'm trying to do, is to be able to adjust the rudder, and I'm in the Freedom Caucus, and that is as I said last week in a press conference with them, that's a spine stiffening organization that goes in tandem with something that that Billy Graham said, and then Donald Trump retweeted what Billy Graham said, that said, when a brave man takes a stand, the spines of others are often stiffened. And so what I'm here to do is to vote the correct way and challenge my colleagues to join.
If you had anything that you could tell your colleagues that are here in the legislature, because unfortunately, Julie and I have been very frustrated with the legislature since you left. But this last year was really, really bad for parental rights. We didn't get bills passed to stop exhibitionists from being in public spaces around children. We didn't get legislation to stop
Pornography.
library pornography, essentially. What do you have anything that you could tell your fellow legislators here?
That we're going to lose this country if we don't understand what put us as the shining city on the hill. When Reagan was talking about that in '79, and there was great optimism where America was. We had a $1.4 trillion gross national debt in 1983. That's 40 years ago under Reagan. We didn't even get to 1 trillion in gross national debt until 1980. And so when Reagan is espousing such great optimism, it was in a time frame where America was doing right things. Where Reagan was in Dallas, Texas, saying, if we stop being one nation under God, we'll be a nation gone under. 1983. We're going to overspend by the same amount in 1 year, 1.4 trillion on the federal level, that it took us 200 years to get to in debt accumulation up to 1983. In 1 year. We are so far off track, but it's because right has stopped being right and wrong has stopped being wrong. Abraham Lincoln said the philosophy in the schoolroom in one generation will be the governing philosophy in the next. And so the fight to protect our children, to make sure that our children know what is right, what is wrong, that there is a standard. And when a nation starts moving away from those standards, then everything becomes permissible. Do you think that cocaine in the White House is being dismissed so easily because it's not in tandem with all of these other things, and people go, well, it's just one more thing? That's the problem. It's the guy who was exposing himself on White House grounds 2 weeks before that. It's the fact that we have such gender confusion, and we have removed the ancient boundaries which were set there by our fathers. And we can love people that disagree with us and love them enough to say, man, you are setting your house on fire. You're setting adjoining houses on fire. And I love you enough to speak the truth to you and tell you it's because I want good for you and your children after you that I'm willing to stand up. And look, in this fight between good and evil, if we remain silent, yeah, our lives will be easier, but our children's not going to be. And we have a chance to turn this country or lose this country. And it's going to be on our back, the men and women who know right from wrong. Look, I'm not giving you my definition of right and wrong. I'm giving you thousands of years biblical truth that says if you do these things, there's a blessing. If you don't do these things, there's not a blessing ascribed to it. And America can't be so intoxicated with unbroken success. I'm quoting Abraham Lincoln in 1863, that we say that we don't need to appeal uh, to God to right this ship. It's our intoxication with unbroken success. We think in our own hearts we've done this. Now, what has made America the great long-running experiment as a republic has been we have biblical underpinnings. We had a limited government that worked in tandem with self-governance. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. John Adams said, if you want to maintain limited government and liberty, you have to have self-governance. That's
Right.
why America has endured. And when we stop having self-governance, when right stops being wrong, limited government won't endure.
Well, and sadly, I think that's what we're seeing right now. You're in the Freedom Caucus. Do you have, I mean, Congress is very large. And we have, well, I'm not going to, I was going to say leader. He's not a leader. I mean, anybody can see him on any video, and somebody's leading him most of the time. So, how do you confront where we are in our government with being able to turn that ship around? I mean, is it just trying to get enough coalitions together? I mean, there has to be some way to make it happen, and I'm just curious to know if you can see to that end point, or is it just standing firm with your principles and saying this is what we need to do?
It's both, Jenny. I mean, I'm convinced if we don't have a great awakening, going to go back to Reagan in 79 when he said, you have a destiny, you have a rendezvous with destiny. And you can either be a byword among the nations or you can be a shining city on the hill. That was Reagan's challenge. Most people don't realize he started off that speech by this exact wording. Our nation is hungering for a spiritual revival. Ronald Reagan, rendezvous with destiny speech. Go look it up. Why was Reagan right? Reagan had a deep rudder. And so it is about, even though a rudder is small, the rudder directs the course of the ship. And so what the Freedom Caucus is doing a lot of times, because we've got a small majority, they can only lose 5 votes. If you'll look at measure after measure since the head of this year, man, the Freedom Caucus has had a tremendous impact in pulling that conference to the right. And so it's about advocating principle. It's about appealing to the American public. It's about voting the right way. And it's about being able to take your rudder and say, look, this is where I'm going. And if you're going to need my vote, you got to go this direction with me. Otherwise, you're going to lose my vote. And it is all inclusive. And every person that has a platform that God's given us, if we'll speak the truth in love, and there can be from the bottom up a change in our culture. Politics is downstream of culture. And if our culture will start engaging, if everybody's watching this and says, well, I'm not an elected official, what can I do? Then I'll tell you what you can do. You can get engaged. You can start every time you're at a Thanksgiving gathering, speak the truth in love. You're engaged on social media, speak the truth in love. In this battle between good and evil, if you remain silent, your life may be easier. You can maintain your image management. And you maybe get promoted if you're on, large business boards and think, well, if I'll, fly right, then there'll be more promotion. Okay. But what have you done to your children and your grandchildren after you? All of us have a conscience that has to be determined whether or not we're going to choose right or wrong. And all of us are given a station as watchmen on a wall. And if we don't cry out, we see destruction coming, then the consequences are going to be on us.
I several years ago, probably 2016, when I was Canadian County GOP chair, Frank Lucas was at a meeting, and I didn't say this in front of everyone, but there was a group of us after his town hall, and me and several state legislators were there. And I said, Congressman, I said, do you foresee a time when a majority of Congress is going to say, you know what, we should give power and money back to the people? And they laughed. And I said, okay, so what are you doing there then? And they stopped laughing. And that question is just still so huge. And the response to it, which I thought was pretty appropriate as far as what I see as the climate in DC. And it's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching that that is such a, you know, such a question was laughable. But
So I
how
don't know the. So Julie, I don't know the full context. I would hope that all of us are evaluating constitutionally. Like what is when I held up my hand, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I read Article 1, Section 8, and it lists 18 things that I'm allowed to do as a member of Congress. James Madison's codfish debate in 1792 and maybe in 1796, he stands up and says, if we don't remain chained down to those specified powers, then the Congress is going to, you two are going to love this. He said, and he was talking about those 18 things. He said, if we don't stay bound, chained down to those specified powers, he said, then what you're going to see is the Congress is going to be involved in directing money to classrooms directly, parishes, counties, and states. They'll be policing the streets. They'll be involved in religion, and they'll be doing more than post office roads. Madison was forecasting where we're at today.
Right.
And the 10th Amendment was put there in our Constitution for a purpose. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. What that was is a way of saying, if you want to solve problems, check the Constitution. If it's not one of those 18 things, of which 1/4 is defense of our country, military minded, and if it's not there, then go to your state legislator and get a fix there. In 1900, there's a book called Restoring the Dream that Stephen Moore wrote, and he says if you look at 1900, that 60% of all tax collection was on the local level, and only 20% of tax collection was on the federal level in 1900. And by the time we got to the mid-90s, those numbers had flipped, and 67% of all tax collection was on the federal level, and only 20% was on the local level. What happened? People stopped adhering to the strict constructionist, stopped being chained down to those specified powers. When they held up their hand to swear an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that requires you to know the Constitution. And when the Constitution says that you got to leave this to the states, if it's not there, you are not empowered to be it's not a nation of men. It's a nation of law, the rule of law. And so that's where we've got to get back to. Our founders were brilliant, and they knew if you give Congress excessive powers to get involved in the minuscule details, then you're not going to have the ability to have these laboratories of experimentation that can adjust and learn from success and failure. And so that's where we're at. So if we want a prescription to turn this thing around, it's in the Constitution. It's in biblical truth.
So maybe we should figure out a way to get law schools to go back to teaching the Constitution and not case law.
Right. Well, and what do you do
Go ahead, Julie.
when the three branches of government don't seem to want to adhere to that, and then the state legislators don't seem to want to adhere to that, and then our schools and city officials don't seem to want to adhere to that. Even in Oklahoma, which is supposed to be the reddest of the red, where do you even begin? I mean, we've been fighting it individually, trying to inform people. And as you have, when I say we, all of us, and it's worse now than ever. And I just
look. I challenge everybody. You open your Bible and open your Constitution.
Absolutely. Well, how people maneuver through this without opening their Bible every day, I cannot imagine.
Look, I mean, George Washington. People say, "Oh, we're not a theocracy." We're not a theocracy. We're a republic. But our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Second President of the United States said that. First President of the United States said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would the man claim the tribute of patriotism, who would labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, both reason and experience forbid us to expect that national morality will prevail in exclusion of religious principle. That is George Washington in his farewell address to the entire United States. Washington was saying, you want to be a patriot? Then make sure these biblical underpinnings stay put to make sure that this limited government experiment continues.
So, question for you. How long do you have? Because I don't want to go over your time, because I know we're already in a committee meeting this morning.
A couple of minutes? 20 minutes. I got 20 minutes. Ben says
you have 20 minutes.
He just rolled me 20 minutes of slack. How about that?
That's awesome. Okay, so I want to ask you a question then.
Okay.
We have been concerned about what we call school choice, about giving taxpayer dollars to institutions or even to parents to send to institutions, especially ones that are private. Because so many of the private schools, I mean, I would imagine in any state, but in Oklahoma, most of them are religious, have some religious aspect. You know so much about the Constitution, and you know so much about history, which we're not teaching kids, by the way, in school anymore, along with numerous other things. How do we keep religious schools separated from state money when we all know that the only thing that was meant by Thomas Jefferson's comment in his letter of separation of church and state was just that the United States cannot declare a religion like England, for example, as the Church of England.
Yeah, his Danbury Baptist letter was saying, don't worry, Baptist. You don't have to worry about this federal government enforcing upon you another denominational structure, because of the context of coming from Europe, where that was the constant fight. You would pick a denomination, somebody's head was chopped off. You'd pick another denomination lead, somebody else's head was chopped off. So that's their context. So what they were doing was protecting the churches from a church denomination. They weren't, I'm just, some of the quotes I've provided by our founding fathers. They weren't saying God shouldn't be involved in government. The person that most of these people talk about, Benjamin Franklin, they say, well, let's look at Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin stood up in the Constitutional Convention and said, he said, I, sir, have lived a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs the affairs of man. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable an empire can rise without its aid? It was Benjamin Franklin, when they were about to break down because they couldn't figure out what we're going to do with this Articles of Confederation. It's not functionable because the tyranny of one had to have almost solidarity among the 13 colonies. It was Benjamin Franklin said, oh, wait a minute, before we break this thing up, let's start getting this thing started by prayer every day. And that was the speech he brought forward to say, look, during the revolution, we sought the Lord, and look what happened. Let's not lose this thing. And then he walks outside, and Elizabeth Powell said, what have you given us, a republic or a monarch? And he said, a republic
if you can keep it. Yep. Which were not very well. So
look, I don't know I know that there was a Supreme Court decision 10 years ago and I can't remember even the name of but it was it the Blaine Amendment? Was it?
And that was even before that, because the Blaine Amendment was basically put into law to prevent public monies from going to Catholic schools, because it was a very anti-Catholic
decision on that said that as long as you break the separation between, there was something in that decision 10 years ago, and man, I'm taxing my memory here, that just said that whether it's religious or not, you've
got it stuffed with all that history.
If you give a parent a choice, then there is a means of making sure that the federal government can't, or the state government can't basically stop religious instruction. That's the way I remember the interpretation. So I think there's some legal protection in terms of how you accomplish that. Man, that's why it's great to say on the state level, I leave it to those of you to figure this out, because it's just not something I'm working on because of my position. The federal government. I had meetings this morning. With an educational official from Oklahoma, and I just said to them, "What can I do to return power and decision making back to the state of Oklahoma?" That was just prior to getting on this call with you all. I mean, that's a position that I think every federal lawmaker needs to have: is what can we do to empower the states to be able to make these decisions?
Well, you asked them the question. What was the answer?
No, I didn't ask them the question. I just said, if you can find something that's in line with those principles, I know that I'll be a champion for you up here. What can I do to return power to so you keep me apprised of where you see opportunities?
Right.
Okay. So I guess that's the main concern, I think, for us is, we've talked about the fact that the federal government has, if we take money from the feds, then the strings come with the federal money. So
you see that, that's happening.
Exactly. So if that's going to happen, is there not a concern about giving any money that has been in the possession of any government, be it local, state, or federal government, to a religious school, and knowing, that the communists wanted to destroy religion, they wanted to, propagandize people? How could we possibly allow state money into a religious school? And should there be
without concern that ultimately the government could then co-opt the instruction through accreditation or otherwise? Look, I think that's I've held for years. That's a valid concern. I believe in school choice. I believe in a parent's right to be able to, and I think I'm talking to individuals that believe that too. So how do you take these two positions and find the solution? I leave it to you all to figure that out on the state level.
Well, Oklahoma already had the best school choice laws. We had government, brick and mortar, government, private schools, charter schools, and government homeschool through EPIC, plus non-government private schools and non-government homeschool. If we put money in the two government money and the two non-government choices, you've just eliminated those two choices. It's going to be government with no choice.
What is the temperature of the Congress for any kind of removal of I know we're not going to get rid of the State Department of Education. Unless Jesus returns to earth himself and abolishes that.
You're talking about, you mean the Federal Department of Education?
Yes.
Okay. You said state. You said state.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, that too. But
Yeah.
What is the temperature for getting rid of, insertion of the Federal Department of Education into local schools?
Yeah, I think, I saw some numbers. The Thomas Massey bill and Chip Roy had a bill where Chip was, I supported both or amendments. One was an elimination. The other was let's take all the money and let's send it to the states. Let's block grant this thing back to the states. I think that has probably the higher probability, just because people have been so accustomed to where we've been since 1979. But the block granting idea that Chip Roy's advancing, I'm a proponent of also. And so I saw 80 votes, if I remember correctly, out of 222. So that's, it's not half, but again, it's going to take entities that come to the realization, not entities, individuals, but it will take entities who are helping get this information out there. Are we a country of laws or of men? And if we're a country of laws, then what does the Constitution say? And let's learn from what's happened. Do we see educational attainment post 1979 that is to a heightened degree since the Federal Department of Education has been engaged? You can't prove it. What we see is a massive expenditure, a loss of efficiency. So why wouldn't we? With the facts bearing out that it's not been the game changer in advancing educational attainment, why wouldn't we go back to the founders? It's because of fear. It's because of fear, because everybody's afraid. Anytime that you say we're going to have a change and we're going to take money and we're going to move it somewhere else, people think, well, I'll lose an election talking about that. That's really what you're dealing with. If you
Right.
can sit down and say, look, are you a constitutionalist? Do you believe in the Constitution, the supremacy of it? I think most people sit down and say, okay, yeah. Thomas Jefferson, yeah, he did say that. He did say that to get us involved in education on the federal level, we have to have a constitutional amendment. So what's stopping us from returning to our founder's prescription? It's fear. And so it causes people to put their re-election capabilities ahead of what's in the best interest of their country.
Well, Julia says constantly, and it's very true because we've actually had legislators tell us this, that the superintendent in a district is the most important, or, the
Politically
biggest voice.
powerful
Yeah.
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 in
And
every community.
Well, my mother was a superintendent for 20 years, turned her little school around, and
yeah, she did.
she did. She turned it into a blue ribbon school,
Yep.
with the Lord's blessing on that school system. That's true. She hired good quality men and women who were teachers, and they advocated strong principles, and they saw the fruit of that in educational attainment. And so I know from, my mother would go into school board meetings, and my mother had been a 20-year classroom teacher before that she was a superintendent. She had a heavy focus on reading, which was, in those early grades, which was so profound in getting those gains later years, because they had such a strong reading foundation. And my mother would walk into those meetings just like most superintendents do. You got people that are, running businesses that are on the school board, and they lean on that superintendent very heavily. So the voice of a school superintendent is massive when it comes to suggesting things that ultimately become voted upon in that superintendent's direction on the school boards.
So unfortunately, though, a lot of the superintendents aren't quite like that anymore. So how
And
do you?
they're trained, the school board members are trained by OSSBA, who tells them you do whatever your superintendent says. So,
Well, and look, we got to have, please don't hear what I'm saying there. I'm not saying that school board members need to acquiesce to what the superintendent has tremendous influence.
right.
But school board members, they better get engaged. They better get engaged to know what when that lawyer's sitting in front of them and saying, let's throw your morals aside because, man, you got a conscious decision to make there. I mean, you've got a conscious decision. And look, I'm proud of some state lawmakers. Senator Bullard, who took my seat on the state level when I went back in the free market. David Bullard has been talking to me, and I don't know what the advancement of this, but I'm proud of him talking about what can we do. I think he filed legislation to say let's prepare a state to be prepared for so that we can have autonomy away from the federal Department of Education. Did he file a bill on that? It seems like I heard that.
And,
so I'm
and
proud
Ryan,
of David for that.
Right, and Ryan Walters, Superintendent Ryan Walters, has taken that stand as well and been vilified for it. Absolutely vilified for
But
it.
y'all remember? Do you remember when we had the Common Core? Jason Nelson, to his great credit, he's brilliant. We all know that. When he and I were leaning in with you all on trying to get the entire community to come on board, that the big sky is falling fear was if you don't do this Common Core approach, then they're going to take the federal funds, which it was such a minuscule amount compared to all the funding that went into education. And Jason was leaning in hard saying, let's pick this fight because our kids deserve quality education. And can you have quality education if you focus on the instruction in that classroom coming from the teacher and you stop so dependent on thinking that money is the solve? Man, the parent and the teacher, and for all the concerns about, the dollars being what is leading to educational attainment, we've lost sight of that parent, of that teacher, and that parent engagement in that school system.
And your Oklahoma State legislature made an unprecedented investment in public education this year, with millions and millions and millions of more dollars. Can you explain why we continually provide money to public schools when if you were in the private sector, the um, uh, the return on investment we're getting from public schools is zero to nothing. So, how is it that we end up giving these investments to public schools when they continue to get worse and not better with every dollar we invest?
Well, that's a state level decision, Jenny. I'm not trying to whitewash myself away from it. I am a citizen of the state of Oklahoma, but ultimately these decisions are, to be left to your governor, your state senators, and your state representatives. In terms of the accountability measures, I'm not up to speed, on the years since I've left the state legislature of where things stand. But the state, what does the state constitution say? Tom Coburn used to say to me when I would call him when I was a state senator, he'd say, "What does your state constitution say?" And so, what does the state constitution say? What is the authority that those legislators are empowered and the governor's empowered with? And then look, I am so convinced that the little house on the prairie model for education is still something we need to be attaining towards. If you read the writings of Abraham Lincoln and you go, oh my gosh, this guy, when parents were engaged, there is so much to be said for us talking about local control and returning power and decision making to the local level, to the smallest of levels.
Yeah.
And we didn't, for all the advances we've made in society in the United States, what have we lost in efficiency because we continue to, throw dollars? I'll just speak to the Fed level. We pull dollars away from you, the local taxpayer, send it all the way to Washington, D.C. And by the time those dollars are returned, what do you think you get to be able to hire a great teacher?
You get a fraction of the dollars.
You get a massive loss of those dollars.
And autonomy, massive loss of autonomy and dollars.
Yep.
So it's a two-pronged deal.
And the creative teachers are at their wits' end because they don't get to teach. They only get to be a robot and say whatever their given script tells them they can say. And that's not teaching.
Yeah.
So I know you're going to have to wrap it up in here in a second. And so I would just like to give you a minute, 2 minutes, whatever you want to take to just kind of wrap everything up. I mean.
Yeah. Look, all of us have a position. All of us have a status in as a leader. And if you taking your dog on a walk, you're a leader. You got kids at home, you're a leader. And we're going to change this country one young adult at a time. And we can't change this culture right now by thinking that within 6 months, that if we take the right stands, that in 6 months this thing is going to automatically course correct because we have allowed this thing generation after generation to be a decline. We're in a fight for the next 20 years with what we're teaching our kids at home. Right. And to change the culture, it's a generational fight. Mom and dad, get on your horse at home. Mom and dad, make sure, look, I do a Bible study with my kiddos. Every night we've been pretty consistent, absent the summer schedule. I don't want to be a hypocrite here, but absent the summer schedule, my wife and I have been consistent for a number of years because I'm taking this, I'm taking my kids' education into account. Their physical, spiritual, and mental state is interwoven. And so if I can make sure that where I have influence and I can do a Bible study at home, then I'm affecting their moral compass. And you know what? Then their teachers at school are not having to deal with discipline problems and education at the same time. Look at so many kiddos. The teachers would clap. I can't educate and discipline at the same time. So moms and dads, we have got to start putting a moral fabric back into our classrooms. That's our place.
Well, we echo that sentiment.
Yes.
As you well know, we want parents to take the reins over their children in every single way. So
Yes,
we
and
can,
parents don't realize they are the first teacher. They
Yes.
are equipped to teach their own children. That is a gift given by God and a requirement, actually. I mean, uh, the home is the first place they learn all the things. So,
Y'all, Ronald Reagan, it's something that's a lot of people have seen, but I love Ronald Reagan's interview with Johnny Carson, where Carson said, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do about all these problems?" And this is 1980 problems, okay? When they had a $1.5 trillion gross national debt, we'll overspend in 1 year, where it took them 200 years to get to up till that point. But, Carson's looking at Reagan and saying, "What are we going to do with all these problems?" And Reagan so succinctly responds and says, "Johnny, oftentimes people are looking to government to be the solution, but yet all too often it's government that's the problem."
right.
amen to that. Josh, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today, because I know
We
you're
do
busy,
appreciate
and it's so good to talk to you. And it's so good to know that there's somebody there in that godforsaken place.
I'm hoping it's not godforsaken, Jenny, because I believe I
Well,
believe it's
you're
not.
there.
I believe there's
You're
good
there,
men and women here.
You're there, so it's not completely godforsaken.
Exactly.
And
So
it's so good to visit with you again.
Well,
I was excited to have you on.
Well, thank you, Julie. Good to see you. Jenny, God bless y'all.
you too, and God bless the family too, and keep hanging in there.
Y'all's
And
too.
you have our prayers for sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
We appreciate that.
Yes. Take care. Thanks
Y'all
again
too.
for your time.
You bet. Y'all too. Bye.
All right. Bye. That was so great to have Josh on this morning, because I know he is, very busy, and I just hated to, weigh him down, because he's got, all kinds of committee meetings and,
Been in
things
2
going.
meetings this morning.
Yes. Yes. So it was so nice to have him on. It's so nice to know that there's somebody there who is a God-fearing person who actually understands history. He always talks so much about history, and he knows his history. And how many of us know what Josh knows?
Right. Well, and even his history, uh, at the state when we were fighting for rights, back when we were all fighting against Common Core and everything else they were throwing in under the guise of good standards. But, that was just what a blessing he's been to us already. And
Yeah. Well, and to the state of Oklahoma. So,
yes, and I wanted to clarify when I said I cried because he was going. I cried because he was going to such a terrible place, not because of anything he's ever done. I was just like, no.
well, and that's the reason I asked him, what are you doing? Because, neither one of us, none of us here at Rope are particularly involved in federal politics, because
Just
I
try
don't
to
even
solve
believe, I don't even believe in the feds anymore. I mean, their overstep in every single area of our life is so
everything.
drastic.
We should be collecting data on them, not the other way around.
Absolutely. 100%.
Because clearly it's horrible, mostly.
100%. And I mean, and I think all of us should be a little buoyed by Thomas Massey, putting his bill out that basically said, we need to get the federal Department of Education out of education. We just need to defund, the federal Department of Education. And we should all be behind that, because the more we get from the feds. Well, and as we heard if you did not see our interview with Monica Klein last Wednesday, please go back and watch that video. she made very clear the fact that, because she was a former comprehensive sex educator with Planned Parenthood, and she made it very, very clear that the money that they got at Planned Parenthood was federal funding, and that federal funding went through her and into schools.
And they had
So
several different umbrella names so that, if they're sending it to a red state, they have a different name for it than Planned Parenthood.
well, yes, and they funded SEL, they funded SEL, social emotional learning, and that was how they got the sex education in, was through social emotional learning. So we can have teachers who decry us for coming out against SEL, but I've never seen anything to me that it indicates that it's anything but a way to propagandize students. I just haven't seen it.
Well, for the abortion industry, so they can corrupt our kids' minds and morals so that they are they're prey.
Yeah. So like Josh said, the Little House on the Prairie model,
Yes.
I think if you really stop and you think, and it's just common sense. I mean, it just takes a little bit of effort to think about this. So think about when the world was smaller. Think about when there was a Little House on the Prairie model, where all of the people in that community went together to pay for a teacher to educate the children in that community, which was the Little House on the Prairie model. They didn't get told what to do by the state. They didn't get told what to do by the federal government, because there was money coming in from the federal government with all these programs attached to it. It was only when we started getting money from the federal government, because if you look at ACT, and this is something I don't bring up very often, but it was a bit of research that I did several years ago. If you look at the ACT scores, and I didn't even think to pull that slide into this presentation or into this video for today. Do I?
I came across that this morning almost.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
How
I
odd.
think I got it, but I just.
Oh, wow. But if you look at that particular model, if you look at the ACT scores over the years, it's very evident that in about 1962, which is, I believe, when Madalyn Murray O'Hair sued the federal government to take prayer out of schools, you started to see a downward trend in ACT scores. But then by the time you got down to 1977, for example, ACT scores just plummeted. And that's when we really started bringing federal money into local education. So the more we bring federal funds in, the more we bring in things that are not education, which is why we're seeing such really devastating scores on English, on mathematics, on history. When you look at those, they're just devastating. I mean, and you don't even need you don't even need those scores. All you need to do is listen. I was listening to, some kids the other day talk. They don't know how to conjugate a verb in a sentence. I could have went. They simply don't, because we've taken cursive out. We've taken punctuation out. We've taken verb conjugation out. We've taken spelling out. And so what are we teaching kids today then? What?
Absolutely nothing.
Well, we're teaching them SEL. We're teaching them how to divide each other into little groups, into racial groups, into sexual groups, into other kinds of groups, so we can create this wonderful division, not unity. It's the opposite of unity. It's division, so that we can pit those groups at each other and they can fight each other, because that's what the communists want, is destruction through violence.
Just like Hunger Games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. So I think it just takes a look at society in general. Just look at the kids around you. How did the kids around you speak? What did the kids around you do? Do they show up for work on time? Do they go to work? Do they have a work ethic? Are they able to speak when they talk? Are they able to count change back and do basic math? If you can answer all of these questions, yes, then you're probably homeschooling. But
Are
besides that,
are they addicted to pornography? Are they
oh, good.
sending their own pictures out to the world to see? I mean, this is what and part of that is these stupid devices that we all have and carry around and get data collected on us. So people that are marketing this stuff know exactly what to say to who.
Well, and you're exactly right about that. But don't forget our interview that we had with Major Flowers. Was it the week before last? Yeah, the week before last, we had our interview with Major Flowers. And remember, he said, parents, if you're going to have these phones, you need to be checking up on them. And there are plenty of apps that are out there to control what kids see on those devices. So to just throw up your hands and say, oh, it's social media, it's the devices. Well, no, it's not. It goes back again to parenting.
Yes.
So, this whole thing of, well, I can't do anything because they're on their phone all the time. Well, who gave them the phone?
Right.
Well, who's not monitoring the phone? I mean, it's just we really legitimately have a scapegoat of parenting in this country and probably worldwide, but certainly in America today. And if parents don't start parenting their kids, then you get what you get and you can't throw a fit, except it's going to bring, the rest of us down who are parenting our kids. So,
right. And parenting is hard work. And like you said,
yes.
We've got a generation that a lot of them don't want to work hard. And or maybe two generations.
Yeah. So anyway, we always go back to, and we'll end up closing out this particular, because, hey, we managed to make it over 9:10. So those of you who are tuning in at 9:00 to see us, we've already been on an hour.
Yes, please go back and listen. It was Congressman Josh Brecheen, and it was a fabulous interview. So, so just start at the beginning as soon as we get it loaded up and listen to the whole thing.
Well, if you're on, we've had several people on Facebook this morning, and all you'll have to do is once we get off, you can go back and restart it from Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, or Twitter. So there you go. Well, Julie, it's wonderful to chat with you again this morning, and you might tell who's going to be on Friday.
Let's see. Friday.
City Center.
Friday is City Center. Jed and Julie Chapel. I used to go to church with them several years ago, and they started an organization basically to give kids in the community a place to go after school, and they just love on these kids. They their heart is to do good, and they are a wonderful option and an open door to help these kids. So we're going to have them on, and that'll be such a great interview too. I'm looking forward to that.
And part of the reason to have them on is to just give impetus to people who are viewing to do something similar. I mean,
right. Yes, we would love for the Christian community to step up and open their doors. And they're a good model. They're a great model to if you're looking to do something like that. They're a great model.
Awesome. So we'll be looking forward to that on Friday. And we're excited to say that we have, except for 2 dates, we are complete with our guest lineup for August. And I think people are going to like it. We've got some really great guests. And I'm actually going to be putting the guest list up on our webpage, on our website, which is www.rope, R-O-P-E, the number 2.org, not com. We're not selling you anything. We're providing you information. So we're .org.
Well, so, and it was funny. We thought when we first started this started the podcast, we thought, oh no, we're going to run out of really good guests. And it's like the longer we go, the more people we think of we want to talk to.
Yeah. So we're going to have some really great guests coming up. Oh, David Bullard, actually, Senator David Bullard, who Josh Brecheen mentioned, because Senator Bullard did take Josh's seat. Senator Bullard is going to be on the 4th, I believe. Amy Cook, who has written a book about getting parents involved in their child's lives, is going to be on the 2nd. So we've got quite a nice lineup of people. So we're hoping that you'll continue to stay tuned, and we'll see you again on Friday.
Yes.
So
at
thanks.
9 o'clock for real on Friday.
9 o'clock for real. That's right. For real. For reals. All right. Thank you again so much for being with us today. So appreciate the time that you took. And if you missed the beginning part of our interview, go back and listen to it. And Julie and I will see you on Friday at 9 a.m. So thank you so much for being with us.